By now, the First Army had already set up in their designated artillery positions. Axe had initially expected to advance past enemy corpses, but for the past 6 days, not even a single demon had appeared. Since things seemed a little strange, Axe decided to call a meeting with the officers and the staff department. During the meeting, Axe asked everyone for their thoughts. Agatha thought it was definitely unusual since the only thing that could restrict the demon's movements was the red mist. But Sylvie confirmed the enemy's supply line is perfectly fine, so that shouldn't be the reason. Ferlin suggested 2 possibilities: either there was trouble on the demon's end, or they were reluctant to risk using their scouts. Axe then asked if anyone had heard anything about the movements near the Takira ruins, which he was told that the area was too far away. The sniper team had already abandoned the idea of luring the enemy and was on its way back. Suddenly, Edith spoke up. She believed they didn't need to waste time guessing the demon's plans. Since there were no obstacles on the ground or underground, they could just bring out the fortress cannons and flatten the demon's outposts. Axe agreed with her plan. They just had to wait for everyone to regroup, and the official assault was set for the next evening. The next day, Ferlin climbed to the top of a hill to survey the bustling but orderly preparations. Soldiers were calibrating the cannons and polishing their weapons. It reminded him of his first day on the battlefield many years ago. Behind him, a familiar voice interrupted his thoughts, asking if he'd figured out the answer to that particular question on his mind. Ferlin chuckled and said that with these weapons and soldiers, hardly anyone on the continent could challenge King Roland now. But what made him feel a little disappointed was the king's order forbidding nobles from joining the combat units. Ferlin admitted he'd rather fight shoulder to shoulder with the troops than sit in the back all day. His father, Sir Eltek, shook his head and told him the age of personal valor and knighthood was long over. He believed the staff department was where Ferlin truly belonged. By then, the sun was almost setting, and the battle was about to begin. The two decided to head back to the camp. When night fell, Vaynor checked his watch at the artillery position and gave the order to fire. A deafening boom followed as a shell was launched from the fortress cannon. In the distance, explosions lit up the dark horizon. The soldiers couldn't see the targets clearly, so they just kept repeating the same steps. Sylvie stepped in, telling the soldiers to adjust the cannon's angle by 5 degrees and fire every 2 minutes. Several more explosions later, the demon's outposts were hit dead on. They all knew that the beasts wouldn't come out at night, which meant the demons were sitting ducks. As buildings crumbled one by one, Sylvie knew it was only a matter of time before the entire outpost was leveled to the ground. As the sun slowly rose, Vaynor ordered everyone to cease fire. We see a bead of cold sweat slide down Sylvie's cheek and something felt off. They'd been bombing the place all night, yet she hadn't spotted a single demon. Could it be that the demons had abandoned this place long ago? But just as that thought crossed her mind, everything changed. The ground began to shake, and through the lingering smoke, figures started to appear. Sylvie's eyes widened in shock and she spotted demons, and there were thousands of them. Seems like shit is going down. In the central command tent, the mood was heavy. Axe slammed the table in frustration. There hadn't been any signs, no red mist, no warnings, so where had all these demons come from? Agatha said it was impossible since the red mist was vital for the demons' survival. Without supply lines, they couldn't even make the journey, let alone fight. Axe pointed out that this outpost could only support about 1,000 demons at most. Could there be another supply point nearby? Agatha nodded. It seemed like the only explanation. But Edith interrupted with a different theory. This made Agatha suddenly think of something. What if the demons had dug a tunnel from the Takira ruins? But she quickly dismissed the idea, and she reasoned such large-scale digging would have surely been noticed by Sylvie. Edith pressed on, asking, what if the tunnel started right under the outpost itself? She pointed at the map, explaining that logically, to destroy the outpost, their forces had to get closer, which left their rear vulnerable. Now, with the demons suddenly showing up, it looked like they'd walked right into a trap. The demons had deliberately avoided ambushing them midway, shrinking their scouting range just to set up this moment. Their goal was obviously to trap and eliminate all of the combat witches who had left the city. Sir Eltek asked the big question, how did the demons manage to avoid Lady Sylvie's detection? Edith explained that Sylvie had been too focused on their scouts and the flying beasts. She could only observe at the edge of her range and might have overlooked a large area underground. Edith didn't mean blaming Sylvie. Instead, she admitted that they'd become too reliant on her. Every witch's ability had limits, and for Sylvie, scanning the entire plane was just too much. Using the communication seal, Agatha asked Sylvie if she could check for the demon army beneath the ground. Sylvie hesitated, worried it would consume too much of her magic. But Agatha encouraged her to go all out as this was no time to hold back. As Sylvie activated her ability, she frowned. She reported that something was blocking her sight. Hearing this, the entire room fell silent. This unexpected result seemed to confirm Edith's theory. Axe was the first to break the silence, telling everyone not to lose hope. Who ends up as prey, he said, will depend on how we fight this battle. Edith smiled and agreed, saying that the artillery barrage last night had prevented the demons from launching a sneak attack. Now, not only had the demons lost their element of surprise, but they also faced a fully prepared army. No matter how you looked at it, this was shaping up to be a promising start. Axe nodded, stood up, and told everyone, no matter what the demons are planning, all they have to do is to take them all down. Not long after, the demons launched their attack, and the first army immediately began their counteroffensive. Agatha and Zoe stood, ready to head out. But before they left, Axe called out to them. He admitted this might not be his place to say, but he was sure it was what His Majesty would have wanted, so he reminded Agatha and the others to protect themselves. The two smiled, reassuring him that they'd be fine. At the front line, the First Army soldiers were already armed with high-caliber rifles and heavy machine guns. As soon as the demons entered range, several of them were hit. Zoe muttered that these creatures disgusted her, and if any of them hit the ground, she'd rip them apart herself. Agatha, curious, wondered why the demons weren't throwing their spears yet. Up above, the demons flew over their positions, ignoring the soldiers entirely and charging toward the rear where the artillery team was stationed. Realizing what was happening, Agatha and Zoe bolted toward the back. At the heavy machine gun crew, a young spotter nervously asked his squad leader why they weren't firing yet. The demons were already within 900 meters. The squad leader told him to hold off until they closed to 300 meters. He understood that heavy machine guns had a range of over 1500 meters, but it was difficult to hit flying targets accurately in real combat. If they wasted a whole box of ammo without landing any hits, it'd crush the morale of the new recruits. Soon, the demons were clearly visible, and the squad leader shouted the order to open fire. Everyone pulled their triggers, and the bullets tore through the leading demons, dropping them instantly. Cheers erupted among the soldiers and they thought they were in the clear. But just then, the squad leader looked up, his expression darkened. Just then, the sky dimmed, and countless spears rained down from above. He screamed at everyone to take cover, but the spears weren't aimed at them. One soldier glanced back just in time to hear a series of explosions. The artillery positions were in shambles. Flames burned, soldiers lay motionless, some dead, some injured, and many cannons were destroyed. The soldiers trembled, but the squad leader gritted his teeth and barked at them to stop freezing up and get back to their positions. They had to take down as many demons as possible before the artillery teams recovered. More demons swooped down toward them, with one landing right in front of them. Zoe arrived just in time, effortlessly blocking the demon. With a single, precise thrust, her iron rod pierced straight through its body. She smirked, marveling at His Majesty's new weapons. If they'd had these weapons 400 years ago, maybe Takira wouldn't have fallen, and the top 3 seats wouldn't have turned against each other. With a swift stomp, Zoe crushed the demon's skull under her boot. She wasn't just fighting, she was here to make them pay. Meanwhile, Vayner slowly got back on his feet, coughing a couple of times as medics rushed to his side. While they bandaged his wounds, he asked what the situation was. The medic explained that the demons had made it to their position, but the machine gun crews were holding them back. Vayner was surprised the demons came down to the ground after throwing their spears. That meant the reinforcements coming to the rescue were from the reserves stationed in the middle, while the front line was still intact. Once the medics finished patching him up, Vayner told them to save as many injured as they could. As for him, he had work to do since those cannons weren't going to fix themselves. Rushing to a cannon that hadn't been destroyed, he reached for a shell, but before he could load it, a demon swung a massive axe at him. Luckily, he barely dodged the attack. The demon raised its axe for another swing, and this time Vayner knew he couldn't escape in time. Just then, an ice wall appeared between him and the demon, stopping the attack. Turning around, he saw Agatha, and he was safe for now. She tells him to stay behind her as the demon pounded furiously at the ice wall, eventually shattering it. The demon raised its axe again, but Agatha acted fast, shooting a barrage of ice shards that pierced and froze the creature solid. Vayner stood up and thanked her, but Agatha cut him off, warning that the second wave of spears was incoming. She turned and called out to Molly. Curious, Vayner looked over and saw Molly standing with a massive slime forming above her head. The slime extended tendrils, gently pulling the wounded into its protective barrier. At that moment, the demons launched their spears. Agatha froze one in midair, once again saving Vayner's life. She suggested he and his men retreat while they could. But Vayner wasn't ready to leave just yet, he wanted to make the demons pay. Heading to another cannon, he aimed carefully, grabbed the firing rope, and yanked it hard. The shell soared through the air, striking one of the demons in the sky with pinpoint accuracy. He let out a smile, saying the witches were the main force against the demons, but mortals had their own ways of fighting too. By now, the entire area was littered with the shattered remains of demon corpses. Agatha couldn't help but marvel at how unstoppable the Takira witches were in close combat. His Majesty's firearms were like the cherry on top, enhancing their already overwhelming power. Still, the Takira witches seemed to prefer traditional fighting styles. Cutting down demons with their own hands seemed to bring them a sense of solace. By now, most of the demons had been wiped out. Agatha estimated that nearly 70% of the flying beasts had been taken down, but the enemy still wasn't retreating. Zoe suspected the demons were preparing one final, desperate attack. Looking up at the sky, Zoe reasoned that there must be a commander or perhaps a high-ranking demon. For them, failing to achieve their goal was worse than death. They'd rather die in battle than retreat. Breeze asked why the commander hadn't come down from the start. Zoe explained that it was waiting for a worthy opponent. If there had been an extraordinary witch on their side, the commander would have shown itself already. Agatha noticed how well Zoe understood the demons and grew curious about her past. She asked about her role back in the Federation. It turned out that Zoe had once been one of Lady Natalia's shadow guards, known in the Sacred Army as the Crimson Lotus. Before Agatha could ask more, the remaining demons regrouped and charged again. Zoe told everyone to focus on protecting the mortals. She would handle these enemies herself. But just as she prepared to fight, Sylvie's voice came through the communication seal, warning them there were multiple magic reactions among the enemies. Suddenly, more demons burst out from the clouds, moving so fast that some were just a blur. Their target shifted to the heavy machine gun teams. The soldiers tried to retreat after receiving the warning, but it was already too late. The ground shook violently as a massive creature landed with a thunderous impact. From its mouth emerged a towering demon clad in black armor. Agatha's eyes widened in shock as she stared at it. And she wondered, what the hell is this thing? However, the monster wasn't much of a problem. She used her ability and quickly got rid of it. Zoe and another Takira which rushed in to shield her. The high-ranking demon roared, its magic forming into a weapon that sliced through a nearby cannon as if it were paper. The steel barrel split in two, the edges glowing as though scorched by intense heat. Instead of being intimidated, Zoe smirked and began mocking the demon, taunting it by saying that mere mortals had already beaten them. The demon turned its furious gaze toward her, and Zoe simply sneered, saying it was time for it to feel the rage of 400 years of suffering. The demon's next attack was blocked by the combined efforts of the Takira witches, who formed a god punishment field to neutralize its magic. The demon's weapon shattered under the force, and nearby Takira witches aimed their rifles at it. Blue magic barriers flickered as the bullet connected, but the barriers dimmed and faded almost immediately. Another volley of gunfire followed, forcing the demon stumbling backward. Its seemingly indestructible armor was pierced, and it fell heavily to the ground. Zoe approached slowly. Agatha asked if she wasn't going to finish the demon. Zoe explained that even demons had limits to their regeneration. Once their magic was depleted, they'd die on their own. The demon lay trembling, blood pouring from its armor. Though its purple healing magic was still active, it was no longer enough to fully heal it. But Zoe had no intention of letting it die just yet. She planned to treat its wounds and provide it with some red mist to prolong its life for a few more days. Agatha was shocked and asked what Zoe was planning. Zoe revealed her intention to have Camilla use her abilities to connect with the demon's mind. It was risky, but the knowledge in the brain of a high-ranking demon commander was worth the gamble. Agatha admitted that in the Takira era, such an opportunity would have been irresistible to the leadership. But now, under Roland's rule and with Tilly on his side, no one would force a witch to take such a risk unless she volunteered. Suddenly, a massive explosion sounded in the distance. To know what was going on, we had to rewind back a few minutes. Back at the front lines, Sylvie had detected a large cluster of magic reactions. She immediately sounded the alarm, spotting something that looked strangely similar to one of His Majesty's inventions. Without hesitation, she ordered the soldiers to focus their fire on its limbs. Under heavy fire, they managed to take down some demons, but the mysterious machine-like thing remained unscathed. More demons took to the skies as Sylvie continued directing the soldiers. Finally, they succeeded in severing one of its limbs. But she still had no idea what were the demons trying to do. Suddenly, the strange creatures came to a halt. From their bodies, pillars grew out of them, and the next second, these pillars were launched with incredible force. Sylvie quickly ordered Shavy to deploy her shield. The pillars crashed heavily against the shield, and one even managed to pierce through it. Through the communication seal, Agatha's voice came through, asking about the situation at the front. Sylvie, clearly anxious, explained that they were dealing with some kind of monster they'd never encountered before and desperately needed support from the fortress cannons. The enemy launched another round of attacks, and while Sylvie noticed their reload time was slower than the cannons, they still suffered heavy casualties. What Sylvie didn't know was that the artillery units in the rear had taken a serious hit. Agatha quickly asked Vaynor to speak with Sylvie. Vaynor told her that while most of their cannons had been destroyed, one was still operational and they were working to fix on the other. He needed shooting parameters to provide support. Sylvie immediately checked her compass and relayed the angle and distance. Vaynor repeated the information to confirm, then ordered the cannon crew to fire. Moments later, a shell hit one of the creatures dead on. Before Sylvie could celebrate, she quickly reported the next target's parameters. The artillery team reloaded swiftly and, even from 2 kilometers away, landed another direct hit. But then, several demons emerged from behind the creatures, using them as cover to charge the front line. Fortunately, the First Army had barbed wire in place, and the machine gun squads reacted immediately. Under a barrage of bullets, the demons were killed in mere seconds. Without the cover of the creatures, the tide of battle turned completely. The demons couldn't even throw their spears before being mowed down by gunfire. Soon, the remaining demons began to retreat. The machine gunners kept firing, and just then, a few more artillery units joined the fight. Sylvie provided the final set of coordinates, and they managed to destroy the rest of the creatures. Cheers erupted from the soldiers as the battle came to an end. They quickly began clearing the battlefield, gathering piles of demon corpses and setting them on fire while recovering all the magic stones. The final count showed that over 6,000 demons had been killed. Half of them were taken out by artillery and machine guns, while the rest died due to the lack of red mist. Zoe, visibly thrilled, declared the battle a massive success. Everyone finally breathed a sigh of relief. After 400 years, they had stepped foot into this forgotten land once again, and this time, humanity had claimed a hard-earned victory against the demons. At this moment, Roland finally established contact with the front line. The battle had yielded incredible results. Not only had they eliminated thousands of demons, but they also discovered over a dozen siege beasts that had been modified into transport vehicles. Roland remembered these creatures could also be used by the witches. Zoe confirmed this, explaining that the beasts were powered by magic stones and could be operated with minimal training. Though they were slow, they could carry heavy loads. Roland thought for a moment and decided they would be perfect for the construction department. The engineering teams were in desperate need of transport vehicles, and the slow speed would actually be an advantage in the city. Switching gears, Roland asked how the demons had managed to evade Sylvie's detection. Agatha explained that they had discovered an underground tunnel at the outpost, leading to a cave 2 kilometers away. Inside that cave, they found a massive stone of God's punishment pillar. In fact, she believed this was the demons' real outpost. Hearing this, Roland was shocked. It was unheard of a stone of God's punishment large enough to cover the entire camp. Agatha described it as nearly 5 meters in diameter and 10 meters tall, with a smooth, polished surface. Even in the height of the Federation era, such a massive stone pillar had never been seen. Roland understood the immense difficulty of crafting such a pillar. He recalled the very stone at the base of the North Slope mine back then. Even a point-blank shot from a musket would leave only faint marks on their surface. The only way to extract and shape them was to slowly erode them with magic blood, followed by meticulous cutting and polishing. However, the thought of this left Roland feeling uneasy. If the demons had developed new processing techniques or gained deeper knowledge of magic, it meant the Third Divine War might be even harder than he had anticipated. Zoe didn't want to admit it, but it was clear the demons were evolving way faster than they were. Just thinking about those creepy crawling monsters they encountered earlier made her wonder, just what other kinds of war machines might these demons have up their sleeves? And how were they supposed to fight against them? These were the burning questions Neverwinter needed answers to, and fast. After reporting the battle results, it was time to go over the First Army's casualties. Even with Manhwa, Lily, and the medical unit working tirelessly, over 190 soldiers were injured, and 75 had lost their lives. Roland paused for a moment before telling Axe to bring back the ashes of the fallen soldiers. With a heavy voice, he declared, "Grey Castle will never forget them." Roland hoped the entire army could return to Neverwinter once the wounded had recovered. He gazed out the window at the falling leaves, knowing that winter was just around the corner. Agatha had something else to share. Apparently, the high-ranking demon that had been defeated by the Takira witches was still alive. However, when Agatha explained the Takira witches' latest plan, Roland wasn't sure how to feel about it. Agatha admitted the plan was risky, but after some serious brainstorming, they came up with a more workable idea. Her proposal was that if it was risky for humans to connect their minds to a demon, why not turn the demon into a human instead? That's when Roland quickly thought of the soul transfer method. As he expected, their plan was to first transfer the demon's soul into the body of a God's punishment warrior. This way, any risks tied to perception or connection would fall entirely on the demon. Roland asked if Camilla had been told about this. Agatha assured him that they had spoken with her. At first, Camilla was firmly against the idea, but Zoe managed to convince her. This surprised Roland since Zoe wasn't exactly known for being persuasive. Zoe simply smiled and said she told Camilla that the person who would link their mind to the demon was none other than herself. As the one who came up with the plan, she believed it was her responsibility to take all the risks. After thinking it over, Roland gave the green light to the plan. Once the call ended, he sat quietly, lost in thought. He couldn't help but wonder if humans and demons really have souls. If they didn't, how could the Takira witches casually switch bodies throughout the years? And if they did, why couldn't a soul exist on its own, separate from a body? After all, if souls could be easily removed or transferred, wouldn't that mean immortality was within reach? Then there was the dream world. How did that even work? And what about the records of the underground civilization that spoke of a light beam leading to the divine realm? Staring out the window, Roland realized that only by understanding the true nature of magic and the divine war could these mysteries ever be unraveled. In the following days, Neverwinter's major industrial projects made some incredible progress. Tilly had already finished the flight manual, and the new generation of gliders was moving along smoothly. She even reminded Roland to make sure the cover design looked good. Meanwhile, the new generation steel warship, after several upgrades, was finally stable enough to sail the seas. The Mage Tower built specifically for Agatha was also complete. A month and a half later, the First Army finally returned to Neverwinter. The townspeople formed groups and came out to greet them. Roland, along with the city hall officials, personally welcomed the soldiers back. And on that very day, the first snowflakes of winter began to fall. The high-ranking demon was brought by the Takira witches to a hidden chamber deep underground. Before leaving, Zoe casually told the group that they just needed to make sure the demon didn't die. As the heavy stone doors closed, Alethea suddenly appeared and asked Zoe if she believed they had a real chance of winning. Zoe smiled and replied that they'd already won, hadn't they? Alethea rolled her eyes and tapped Zoe's forehead with a tentacle, saying she knew exactly what she was trying to ask. Soon after, Pasha and Celine joined them. Pasha noted that Zoe seemed so relaxed, and she felt that was already a pretty good answer. Zoe stayed quiet for a moment before admitting she wasn't completely certain. The demons were nothing like they were 400 years ago. She explained that while Lady Akali's plan wasn't entirely wrong, but following it would almost guarantee humanity's defeat. Pasha sighed, saying it was a relief they had chosen the right person to follow, and Lady Natalia's decision back then had been the right call. She reflected on how things had turned out and she remembered how many years ago, their differing beliefs had led them to side with Lady Natalia, breaking apart the Federation. That fateful ambush, which wasn't exactly fair, had destroyed the very foundation of the Federation. Even now, she could still picture their old comrades, who died believing they had made the wrong choice and it was them who destroyed the witch's best chance of survival. Celine began to cry, admitting that even after 400 years, she was still terrified she might have made a mistake. Zoe walked over and comforted her, saying while they couldn't be sure who would ultimately win, at least there was some hope now. Pasha stepped closer and looked at the group, asking if this meant they could finally fulfill Lady Natalia's wishes. Alethea hesitated and pointed out that they still hadn't found the true chosen one. Zoe shrugged and reasoned that the ancient underground texts never mentioned if the chosen one had to be male or female. While this particular chosen one couldn't activate the device, they were just as capable of dealing with the demons. Celine agreed, saying there was no rule stating there could only be one chosen one, and if they found a new witch who fit better, they could always switch later. Zoe nodded but brought up something else. Camilla had only agreed to the plan of connecting with the demon after learning that Zoe would personally put herself at risk. However, Zoe added with a wry smile, saying this meant Camilla's concern for witches' safety didn't include monsters like herself. What Zoe said made the mood grow heavy. It was exactly what they had worried about. Despite they still see themselves as witches, perhaps the new generation didn't necessarily think of them the same way. Roland was the only one who had accepted them so quickly. But Pasha said she didn't regret anything. She couldn't control what the future might bring, but they could at least plan ahead and carve out their own path. Alethea smirked and asked if their grand plan was to hide in the mountains, disappear quietly, or dig a hole and bury themselves. Pasha raised a tentacle and declared, with all seriousness, that they wouldn't do any of that. Instead, she said, they were going to become an indispensable force for the human kingdoms. Celine gently patted Zoe and asked if Pasha was referring to the kind of strength the gods' punishment witches had. She reasoned, however, that no king would likely see it that way. She then explained that their power wasn't just about physical strength, it was also about knowledge. In His Majesty's dream world, there were books, libraries, and scholars. If they dedicated some time to learning even the most basic knowledge, over a decade or so, they could become invaluable allies who fully understood the king's vision. Since mortals would age and grow weaker over time, they can work hard to become true inheritors of His Majesty's vision. Pasha chuckled and gave Celine's head a playful pat, saying the plan would only matter if they first defeated the demons. For now, she added, they should focus on fine-tuning the soul instrument. Celine laughed too and joked that their king probably wouldn't have the patience to wait until tomorrow. Once the celebrations outside ended, their side should be ready as well. While the celebration continued outside, Roland had already arrived at the third border town. As soon as he stepped in, he was greeted by the Takira witches standing in a perfectly arranged line before him. Before he could ask what was going on, Pasha began thanking him and pledging Takira's eternal loyalty to him. Roland was taken aback, feeling their attitude had suddenly become much more respectful. Their formal salute even made him wonder if they now saw him in one of the Federation's top 3 seats. Quickly clearing his throat, Roland told them there was no need for such formality and insisted the victory belonged to everyone. He then asked about the preparations for the soul transfer. Pasha informed him everything was ready to begin. They moved to a massive magic stone, under which lay 3 stone beds. One held a male god's punishment warrior body, while another had the high-ranking demon, its limbs chopped off and pinned down to the bed. Zoe explained that they had already asked Lady Nanawa to heal the demon during the journey but still needed to make certain adjustments. Wendy, curious, asked what kind of adjustments they needed. Zoe, visibly excited, replied that it was simple, they just needed to wait for the demon to recover slightly, then stab it again to force it to burn more magic and self-healing. Her tone and expression startled both Wendy and Roland. Zoe added, almost casually, that when she was new to this, she had stabbed the demon multiple times too quickly, almost causing the demon to die outright. Roland coughed awkwardly and suggested they could begin now. Celine extended her tentacle to activate the magic stone, while Pasha assisted her. The stone began to glow brightly. Celine announced that core number 3 had been tuned into the soul instrument magic stone, and they could proceed. In the next instant, the light engulfed the two bodies. Celine mentioned that luck was on their side and they had successfully captured the soul. Now, they just had to wait. Suddenly, the previously motionless god's punishment warrior jolted to life, his eyes snapping open. His face contorted in pain, and his body trembled uncontrollably. Zoe calmly explained that this was expected since being stuffed into an unfamiliar body would always cause this kind of reaction. She added that when they first transformed, they had experienced something similar. Without help, even basic tasks like eating were impossible. Zoe walked up to one of the stone beds and said that when demons are mentally overwhelmed, this is their best chance. She explained that Camilla would handle things from here, and if anyone had questions, they could ask directly. But before they started, she had one request, which was that no matter what happened, as long as she didn't signal to stop, they shouldn't break the connection. Camilla was surprised, then for the first time looked concerned and worried. Roland nodded, saying he understood. Taking a deep breath, Camilla began to use her ability. Zoe's face immediately twisted in pain. Suddenly, her voice changed, and he asked what they had done to him. Roland knew it wasn't Zoe speaking but the demon. The demon grinned wickedly, calling them lowly crawling creatures and demanding they release him, or else he'd make this female body suffer. Wendy gasped and quickly grabbed Roland's arm, retreating in fear. The group looked at Zoe, unsure what was happening to her. Anna stepped in front of everyone and calmly pointed out that the demon was bluffing. She observed Zoe's hands and noted that the demon hadn't taken control of her body. Roland caught on to Zoe's strategy. Perhaps this direct form of communication left the demon little time to think or resist. With a cold smirk, Roland asked, since the demon called them lowly crawling creatures, then what would that make him, given he had been defeated so thoroughly? The demon froze for a moment before Roland continued, mocking him by pointing out how his army was completely destroyed, and he himself ended up like a pincushion. He added that they had turned thousands of demons into dust. Pointing at the demon, he asked who the real lowly species was now. The demon shook his head repeatedly, refusing to believe it. In a shocked voice, he muttered that unless Roland had obtained a legacy fragment and elevated his race, it was impossible. He speculated whether their weapons had been created using knowledge from such a fragment. Roland quickly latched onto the term and demanded to know what the legacy fragments were. The demon ignored him, mumbling that it didn't make sense. He said humans were nothing but insects who had never set foot in the Sky-Sea realm. How could they have gotten their hands on a legacy fragment? But if that wasn't the case, why had they failed so miserably? His voice grew louder, calling it all lies. He declared that he, Kabratabai, would never accept it. Roland sneered, telling the demon that denial wouldn't change their crushing defeat. He mocked the demon's so-called impossibilities as nothing more than a joke. Furious, the demon roared that Roland dared to call the foundation of their species' survival and ascension a joke. He believed the key to their race's continuation and evolution was no laughing matter. Pasha suddenly chimed in, asking if the demon was referring to a red cone-shaped crystals that upon close contact, transported someone to a place with 4 paintings. Tilly added that it sounded like the demon was talking about divine relics. The demon scoffed, dismissing their term divine relics and claiming it had nothing to do with the gods. He explained that consuming the fragments would elevate their species while losing them would turn them into prey for others. But the demon also asked how they could have possibly got their hands on the fragment. Roland realized the demon must have thought there was no way they could obtain the relic, since to gain a relic, a race must annihilate another, and during the First Divine War, humans were too occupied fighting the demons, meaning there was no chance for them to destroy another civilization during this time. But at the same time, it seems that these relics dictated the survival and advancement of entire civilizations, so this would also mean the Divine War was an endless, brutal competition with no hope for peace. He asked if this was all part of the gods' design, which was why they also called it the Divine War. The demon chuckled, suddenly much calmer, and replied that the war had nothing to do with gods. It was about the species themselves. The final ascendant would open the path to the source of magic and gain unlimited power. They believed in the face of that power, they themselves will then become the divine will. He added that none of this matters for lowly creatures like humans, who were destined for extinction. Roland tried to ask more questions, but something felt wrong. He suddenly called out Zoe's name. He heard the demon laugh maniacally. The demon announced that the female wouldn't hear them anymore and mocked their use of magic against him, calling it suicidal. He admitted he couldn't control the body, but that didn't mean he couldn't use magic. Roland glanced anxiously at Camilla, who looked equally alarmed. The demon snarled, declaring it was too late, and tells them to say goodbye to the female. A moment later, everything went silent. Camilla, in a panic, announced that both souls had vanished. Everyone froze. Was the soul in Zoe's body still hers? Alethea reacted quickly, wrapping her tentacles tightly around Zoe to prevent any sudden attack. Roland asked Camilla if the demon's soul had truly transferred into Zoe's body. Camilla admitted she'd never encountered such a situation before but theorized it was possible. Tilly asked if there was a way to confirm this. Alethea, regaining composure, said the only way would be if the demon spoke again, but for now, they had to prepare for the worst. After a moment of silence, Roland suddenly thought of an idea.